Hi, everyone. This is America Adapts, the climate change podcast. Hey Adapters, welcome back to another exciting episode. Joining me are two of the leading extreme heat experts in the country, Dr. Kelly Turner of UCLA and Dr. Ladd Keith here in Tucson at the University of Arizona. Kelly and Ladd join me to share their great news, getting awarded a NOAA grant for the Center for Excellence in Heat Resilient Communities, which is part of a broader approach to heat governance by the Biden administration. We'll discuss what's in the grant, what they hope to accomplish with extreme heat governance and planning over the next 3 years of the life of the grant, and the discussion also covers federally funded research programs supporting rural and tribal communities with heat resilience, mapping shade equity nationally, and initiatives on indoor cooling. We'll also get Kelly and Ladd's take on the upcoming heat season and how the media is doing covering the issue. Both have been on the podcast before, and it's always a treat to host Kelly and Ladd. Definitely check out the show notes to hear more about the grant and how you and your local community might be able to engage in the work they are doing. Okay, let's join Ladd and Kelly and talk extreme heat. Hey Adapters, I've got an exciting episode for you. Joining me is Dr. Kelly Turner and Dr. Ladd Keith. Kelly is an associate professor of urban planning and associate director of the Luskin Center for Innovation at UCLA. And Ladd is an associate professor in the School of Landscape Architecture and Planning and a faculty research associate at the Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy at the University of Arizona here in Tucson. Hi guys, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having us back.
Yeah, thanks for having us back, Doug.
Ladd, you've been a regular on this podcast, and Kelly, you're starting to become a regular, and I love having you guys on. And when we talk about extreme heat, you guys are doing a lot of cutting-edge work, but we have a cool announcement to do for this episode, and I wanted to get the word out. But before we do that, you know what we do here. For people that aren't familiar with your episodes, Kelly, can you just give us a general overview of what you do there at UCLA?
Yeah, sure. I, at Luskin Center for Innovation, run our heat equity research program, and we do three major things there. First thing we do is study heat governance in the settings where vulnerable people might be exposed to hot conditions. The second thing we do is aid in community planning. And then the third thing that we do is create data that's actionable for stakeholders and decision makers to use.
All right, Ladd, and you there at University of Arizona.
Yeah, so I study heat planning, policy, and governance and have several federally funded research programs around that. So a couple by NOAA, of course, which we're going to speak about later, and then another by the Department of Energy and another with CDC.
So there's really good news that you guys heard recently. I heard it too. And Kelly, I'm going to start with you. Tell us about this NOAA grant, the name of the grant. And I want you just to start at the 30,000 foot level, what this grant is all about. And then we're going to dig into the details throughout this conversation.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm really excited to announce that we have been solely awarded NOAA's Center for Excellence in Heat Resilient Communities. And our main goal is to help communities plan for greater heat resilience, but to recognize pipelines between communities and the federal government. So to hopefully do some co-learning with a group of about 50 plus stakeholders about how communities can address heat resilience across a range of different factors, and then to help the federal government understand how they can better support communities.
Ladd, and could you explain, because the Biden administration is all in when it comes to addressing extreme heat. Can you tell us how it fits into that broader context there?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an initiative that's really being pushed forward through NIHIS, so the National Integrated Heat Health Information System, which is hosted by NOAA and other federal agencies. And this particular center, the two centers that are being launched, are funded through the IRA and will exist for the next 3 years. And we're looking for opportunities to continue it past that initial funding period too.
All right. Now, Kelly, can you tell us who the principals are? And I think there's a technical term, but you, Ladd, and there you have another primary person, but maybe some of the other key partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. I am the principal investigator, and Ladd Keith and Sarah Miro from Arizona State University, who we've worked together quite a bit already, are going to be co-leading this center. And we're working with a team of, as I said, a lot of different people, but we have over 10 universities represented of leaders from around the United States and even in Mexico.
Yeah, just to give a shout out to Sarah, she couldn't join us today because she's currently in Germany as a Humboldt Research Fellow at the Technical University of Munich. So that's an exciting opportunity for her green infrastructure and resilience planning research.
And Ladd, America Adapts played a key role on the advisory committee, right? What was that all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've spoken about before, communication and really getting the message out there is so important. And we want to make sure that this center is really focused on achieving that. And so you are on the advisory committee for the center, which is really exciting for us.
I'll just say I did a whole lot of just not much. There's a lot of you guys did all the most of the work, but I appreciate you guys inviting me and just being able to contribute at all. And I'm glad communication was an important part of what you're trying to do here. And I'm really excited to see how this grant unfolds. All right, Kelly, let's dig into this a little bit here. So what kind of partnerships and collaborations are expected between these centers and community-based organizations?
Really, there are two main goals. One is to create a robust framework across a diverse set of contexts that communities could use to do heat resilience work. And so we have a series of 6 cores that the whole center is organized around. So the first goal is for us to create this framework. And the second goal is to then fund and to support communities, so 10 communities per year over 3 years, to test that framework and refine it. And I could get into a little bit about each one of the cores if that's of interest.
How about just one, just so people can get a flavor of what they're going to do?
Then I'll tell you the one that I think I'm most excited about because I think it's most needed, and that's the cost-benefit analysis core. So trying to arm communities with the kind of analysis that will help them go after funding at state and federal levels that maybe is available, but they couldn't tap into before because they're using maybe temperature as a metric and not dollars.
All right, Kelly, I'm going to stick with you just briefly here. So in going back at the 30,000 foot level, so this is part of the Biden approach to dealing with extreme heat, or correct me if I'm wrong, this National Integrated Heat Health Information System, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so right now that essentially is a small line item within NOAA's office, and there's an interagency working group, but this is a step towards supporting the whole of government approach that the federal government has been working towards. And it's also in line with Justice 40. So one of the things we're doing is trying to help and direct investments into communities that have historically been underinvested in terms of extreme heat, because we do know that heat is one of those issues that tends to be split along equity lines.
All right, Lad, and following through with explaining what these broader programs are. Now, as part of this grant, there's this Heat Resilient Communities framework, and I think that's one of the key planning tools in all this. Can you give us some detail what that's supposed to do?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of levels to it. So one is we will be working with the cohort of 30 communities that Kelly was talking about over the 3 years of the initial life of the center. And we'll be co-developing essentially this heat resilient framework that the communities will be going through. And it involves all of the cores and is really focused on supporting heat action planning at the local level and really drawing on that network of experts that we have involved in the center. I think one of the exciting things is we'll be co-developing this heat resilient framework with the communities that we're working with. And of course, we'll be supporting the initial 30 communities, but we'll also be putting a lot of that information on heat.gov so that it's accessible to all of the other 19,000 communities in the United States. And another part of it that's really exciting is all of the lessons that we're going to learn through the center is feeding that back to federal agencies and really partnering with them so they know how to better support community heat planning as well.
Just so you know, you guys shared with me some media notices that University of Arizona put out, Arizona State, UCLA, and a few others. And everyone had a little bit different angle on what this grant is supposed to do. And so what I thought was interesting about this framework, and you've said it, but I just want to dig into it a bit further. Maybe Kelly, you want to respond first. And it's supposed to identify and evaluate policies, protocols, and lessons for heat resilience that can be applied in the U.S. and internationally. And you've described it, but I thought that was very specific, and I thought that could be very useful. It's just almost this template to understand what's really working out there. Or am I misinterpreting that?
Yeah, the idea is that there's a lot of stuff going on. There are a lot of cities that have been innovating around the world. There are a lot of communities that have been innovating, and there's pockets of innovation even at state and federal governments. But what we lack right now is a coherent and coordinated effort. And so what this really is getting everyone a seat at the table to discuss and create some knowledge exchange so we can figure out what the best practices are that are out there. What are some gaps and how can we fill those?
Lad, I'm going to let you do 2 of these. And so it's not housed anywhere. And I know you corrected someone on that, Kelly. So what exactly is the University of Arizona doing, and what is Arizona State doing? And then Kelly, I'm going to let you answer for UCLA.
Yeah, so this is what the federal government calls a virtual center. And although the 3 universities are leading it, UCLA, ASU, and University of Arizona, of course, it's a virtual center. So it's not physically in one space. It serves the whole nation, right? And the University of Arizona's role is really exciting because in addition to my involvement, we have a couple of other faculty involved in the different cores throughout the center. But one of the key things the U of A is going to provide for the center is through the Udall Center's Native Nation Institute, and is really focused on providing more education for those involved with the center on supporting tribal communities, and then also direct tribal support too, for this idea that tribes have different needs than other cities in the United States, other jurisdictions in the United States, of course. And so we will be focusing on supporting tribal heat resilience as well through this center.
Yeah, so UCLA is the administrative home of the center. So while this is virtual, which is amazing because we're able to involve people from around the world in our conversations, we do have some actual kind of hard administrative work to do, like getting communities recruited and on board and funded. And so that's going to be happening at UCLA. However, I would say that one of the other really exciting things is that we do have a bunch of universities represented. And this is a chance for us to get students who maybe are doing applied planning projects linked in around the US with the communities that they work in to study and produce and train the next generation of heat leaders.
Kelly, I'm going to stick with you too, because, okay, it's a relatively big, it's not Department of Defense where it's $1 billion, right? But it's a nice chunk of money, $2.5 million, right? That's the grant size.
Yeah, it was reduced to $2.25 million.
Okay. Still sounds like a lot, depending on what you're doing with it. But literally, okay, so the administrative homes there is at UCLA, but you guys are professors, you're doing your day jobs and all those kind of things. But so what actual form does it take? Are you hiring like a coordinator and keeping momentum going? And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of virtual meetings and such. How does it actually look as it unfolds over the next 3 years?
Yeah, so at Luskin Center right now, we've hired 2 dedicated staff. One is a large picture program manager who's going to be helping guide the big picture formation of the center. And another is a dedicated program coordinator who I'm really excited about both of them coming on. They come with a lot of experience working in climate adaptation and with community heat planning, respectively. So that's what's happening as the administrative home. The other work is basically the cores have to come together individually as subgroups. So each one of these cores, we have a stress testing existing systems, resilience indicators, communication, which is the one that you're part of. And each one of those groups is going to try to come up with a resource kind of guidebook framework. And then the other kind of pragmatic thing is providing some technical assistance to communities. So sitting in a lot of meetings with leadership from communities and trying to understand what their needs are and to craft a particular program for how we can best support them.
So with these communities that you're working with in LAD, this is for you, and there is $2.2 million. Is there money that outside groups can apply for? Or is the grant just designed, okay, you have administrative costs, and we're working out there with different groups, but how does that work? Is there any sort of, you have freedom with the funding that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we will be supporting the 30 communities in this initial 3 years, like we've mentioned. Okay. And some of the money is dedicated to support the communities that are selected into that cohort to actually do some of this technical work and policy work, right? I think an important thing to note is that although this is a really critical step, and we're really excited to be at the lead of heat governance and with the Center for Heat Resilient Communities, this is still a drop in the bucket compared to how the nation addresses other hazards, right? And so it's a really important first step. And again, we're really excited to be part of it, but it's just the very beginning of kind of what we're looking at as far as heat governance and the very first drop in the bucket as far as the resources needed for the nation's number one weather-related killer.
I want both of you to take a crack at this question. Climate justice, environmental justice, they're both big themes or the same thing that's going to be as part of this grant. What does that look like? And Kelly, let's start with you. How are you prioritizing that? Because for the Biden administration, this is part of a bigger climate justice program, right?
Yes, absolutely. At the heart of this is to try to eventually getting to supporting communities that fall within the Justice 40 or the CJUST tool sort of framework. Our hope is that we can support as many of those types of communities, Indigenous communities. And by the way, community is really broadly construed. So this could be a disadvantaged community within a particular municipality. This could be a school district, really anything. So we're hoping to look at the places where there are vulnerable populations that are in need of heat resilience planning and focus on those.
And Lad, could you just maybe elaborate maybe some of the work that you've done here in the Tucson area? But so like climate justice, and it's just going to help maybe supercharge some of those efforts, right?
Yeah, and although the center is, of course, led by UCLA, U of A, and ASU, and we're located here in the Southwest, and we are taking a very national approach with this, with our national partners that are at other universities. And I think to the question of equity, we're also very focused, in addition to the Justice 40 initiative, at looking at supporting communities of different sizes, right? And so a lot of the action that's been currently going on is in very large cities that are well-resourced. And we're taking a very broad approach to this, like Kelly mentioned. So we're not just going to support large cities, but we're going to look at medium communities, small communities, rural areas too, and really trying to get a diverse set of geographies and community sizes in this cohort that we're working with.
Yeah, I have one other thing to add on the environmental justice front. So our research center has put out a report called Making Justice 40 a Reality several years ago, and we have been working with the Biden administration to actualize the goals through practical steps of implementation. And we hope to take some of those kind of goals and best practices from that report and put them to practice here in this program.
And Kelly, I'm going to stick with you. And you guys have answered this in a somewhat different ways, but okay, 3 years from now, and you guys have been working with these communities and the grant has been out there, but just I'm trying to visualize a highly functioning community after they've been engaged with this grant. What would that look like? You're whatever community. And so, okay, they're doing this right. And what on the ground, what might that look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, what that would look like is one, a community would have some sort of heat plan that maybe passes all the points of a strong plan. So that might be things like having specific goals with metrics that can be tracked and evaluated. Maybe they're even tinkering with it because they've learned lessons by evaluating as they've implemented their heat plans. Another metric of success for me would be a community has successfully leveraged this to get further support from either their state or from the federal government. But I think the ultimate metric of success here is proving basically to the federal government that this is an investment worth making and that we can improve the health and well-being of communities by strategic investment in heat resilience.
Yeah, and Doug, I think a really important point with this, to build on what Kelly was saying, is you're not going to go through a heat resilient framework once and become heat resilient forever. And so that we have to treat heat like other hazards, where we continually plan for wildfires or floods or sea level rise over time. So we're hoping that this framework will give communities the leg up, right, to get them well positioned to continue to plan for heat in the future. And Kelly mentioned, whether it's a dedicated chief heat officer or whether it's finding someone that's already coordinating things like this and having heat being part of what they're looking at, and whether it's a dedicated heat action plan in the community, or maybe they take a different approach and they integrate heat planning into a climate action plan. I think we're open to any of those situations based on communities' resources. We just want to see heat addressed comprehensively.
All right, Lad, I'm sticking with you. And just wrapping up the session on the NOAA grant, you were successful. These things aren't necessarily easy and they can be a big pain when you apply for them, but it's always great when you get them. And tell us a little bit about that process. And I'm also curious, how is it integrating maybe with other moving parts in the federal government? Was the National Climate Assessment something that was even referenced or used as part of this application process?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I think, and Kelly can add to this too, I think what probably gave us quite a bit of a leg up is just our continued involvement with NIHIS and NOAA in the past, and the fact that Kelly, myself, Sarah Miro, all have collaborators across the nation that are already working on heat. And so when this call came out, we were incredibly well positioned to reach out to all of our collaborators and say, we can do something really special with this. Let's go for it. And of course, it drew on folks that have been working on the National Climate Assessment. We've received previous NOAA grants before to work on stuff. And we have continuing research grants, like I mentioned, from other federal agencies too. So I think all of that helps, but it's really this collaborative effort that's drawing on all of our research colleagues across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a prime example of it takes a village. We couldn't do this alone, and we are very lucky to have people with very diverse expertise as a part of the team, including we have people from the private sector, from nonprofits, cities to state governance. This is going to be really exciting to learn across all those areas and domains. To follow up on what Lad said, that this is quote unquote a drop in the bucket, I would flag that in California, we are investing in a program called the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program, where we hope to invest in communities in California. And we hope that this is a model that could be implemented in other states as well. Just basically coordinating. It doesn't have to be this federal program, but we hope that this is a model for which different states can also see the seriousness of investing in extreme heat preparedness.
All right, guys. So if people want to learn more about the grant, I'm going to have all sorts of links in my show notes and all sort of explanations of it. But I just want to wrap up this episode, just getting your thoughts. So I normally do an extreme heat episode. It's randomly throughout the year. And last year I did it at the end of the heat season. But here we are at the beginning of it. And I want to talk to you two heat experts and trying to get a lay of the land. And Lad, I'm going to start with you. So what's going on out there? I think we're having some record heat out there, right?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things going on. Of course, last year was globally the hottest year on record, right? And I think that, again, we continue to break these records, and every time we do it, increases awareness about extreme heat as a hazard. Here in Arizona specifically, I think that led to a couple of really exciting things. So our governor had declared a heat emergency in the summer, which led to our extreme heat preparedness plan being passed in this spring. And now we have the nation's first state level chief heat officer. And that's spurred additional action where we now have a state level cooling center coordinator. And here in Southern Arizona, where you and I live, Doug, we now have a joint heat action team that's meeting weekly that essentially involves all jurisdictions, all tribal entities, preparing and responding better for this summer. So I think even in Arizona, we've seen in the last year, this idea of heat governance really gel together and really go light years above and beyond what it was even just last year.
And Kelly, you have any thoughts on the lay of the land? Obviously, you mentioned California, but just even nationally, I guess the fact that these grants were awarded when they were like late spring is that the administration wants to get a jump on the summer. But what's your sense of what the heat environment's looking like out there?
Yeah, nationally, there's a lot of important conversations that this center has an opportunity to tap into. For instance, discussing what is the role of FEMA, for instance, in both heat emergency response, but also in terms of heat mitigation through its programs like BRIC. Other conversations have to do with, for instance, LIHEAP assistance and whether or not assistance with weatherization should also be tilted towards hot weather climates. And then, of course, general conversations about heat. NOAA is a heat information hub, but what about the public health side of things? So I'm really excited to start having conversations about heat as a public health problem.
And Lad, because you and I, we interact a bit more. So how's the media doing when it comes to covering heat at the moment? And I guess putting some context there is we'd always used to joke is, I mean, you get quoted a lot. And Kelly, I'm sure you get quoted a lot. And usually it's July or August when it's super hot. And that's when all the papers and TV and radios come a-calling. But are they doing better? And my own sort of total anecdotal observation is I feel like the heat has been covered a bit more, but maybe for some of the wrong reasons. Like there's legislation out there to keep local governments from enacting heat law, protecting workers in extreme heat. And they're actually preventing that from happening. So we're actually getting some heat stories even out of the heat season. So thoughts on that, Lad?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we spoke about this last year, but I serve on the Global Heat Health Information Network, GHIN. It's GHIN.org. And a couple of years ago, we put out media guidance, right? And so this idea that what could the media do to better cover heat? And so that's still on the website, still a resource that folks can access. I think in the last couple of years, we've seen a little bit less of those things I had complained about previously on the podcast. So the stock footage of kids eating ice cream cones or happy families at the beach during a heat wave that's killing tens to hundreds of people, right? So I think we're seeing kind of more sophistication around that. I think also what we've really seen is this idea that heat is not just a summertime issue to cover, but I've certainly myself, and I know Kelly too, we've been speaking more with journalists kind of year round now that are looking at doing deeper dives into heat related issues, which is really good to see. So it's not just in the moment of the crisis, but doing a deeper dive into it. I would say one thing that happened last year that I would like to not see repeated this year is a lot of folks descended on Phoenix with all of the records being broken. And there was a lot of focus on it's almost like a sports game or political game of which record would be broken next. And if it didn't get broken, then it wasn't worth covering that it's still incredibly above average temperatures, right? And so I think we need to recognize that we still will break records going forward into the future with climate change. But this isn't just about the number of records that are being broken. It's about the impacts to humans and communities, right? And we'll continue to see these above average temperatures, whether we're breaking records on that specific day or not.
And Kelly, your observations about your own participation in the media and how it's doing out there.
Yeah, I agree with Lad that the media coverage has become a little bit more year round, although of course there are still spikes when it's hot, and a lot more targeted and specific about particular pieces of legislation or particular issues. One of the things I'd like to communicate is that we're in a really exciting moment for heat governance, I think, and for environmental governments more broadly. Heat doesn't have a system of governance, really, like a really true cohesive federal program that is funded. And I don't know that there's ever been an opportunity where we had equity as the guiding principle, as we do now with Justice 40, to create potentially a federal government program from scratch. So that's really exciting. But in the same vein, you mentioned some of these labor laws, like in Texas and Florida, that are trying to restrict the capacity to protect outdoor workers. And so now the federal government has this second kind of impetus to step in and provide some basic rights protections. And I fear that we're getting closer and closer to a moment where heat, which has been relatively apolitical, might start to get politicized.
That's a great observation. And it always happens. You think these no-brainer things that we could work on together. Yeah, will remain to be seen over the summer how you guys get interviewed. I'm sure I'll be following it closely. But as we wrap up this episode, I just want to give each of you a chance, maybe just to plug a little bit more of the work that you're doing. Lad, I'm going to start with you at the University of Arizona, and maybe just also plug on how people can engage with this grant. And Kelly, I'm going to let you wrap it up. But Lad, let's start there.
Yeah, thanks so much, Doug. So I do want to give a shout out to the other federally funded research programs that I've been involved with, and we're going to certainly be tying those in and supporting the new Center for Heat Resilient Communities. So first one, of course, is NOAA's CLIMAS, which I've mentioned before on the podcast. So that's the climate assessment for the Southwest, which is one of NOAA's climate adaptation partnership programs. They're across the country. I would encourage listeners to reach out to their own CAPRISA program, because almost the entire country is covered at this point if they have climate services or climate information that they need. What we're doing with CLIMAS this round of funding is really looking at better understanding how to support rural and tribal communities with heat resilience, which again is an idea that will feed directly into this new Center for Heat Resilient Communities. The second one I'll throw a plug out for really quickly is the Department of Energy funded Southwest Urban Corridor Integrated Field Laboratory, or Southwest IFL, because we love our acronyms in academia and the federal government, right? But through the Southwest IFL, we're really looking at climate change modeling, observations, and resilient solutions for the Arizona Urban Corridor. And so we're going to be doing some really exciting data collection across the Arizona Urban Corridor this summer. And Doug, as a call to action, I would just say for folks that are interested in learning more about the new Center for Heat Resilient Communities, keep an eye on heat.gov. That's where we'll put the call or recruitment out for communities interested in being part of that cohort. But it's also where we'll post all of the information and all of the resources for communities that aren't able to become part of that cohort too. And I would just say, I'm sure Kelly will reiterate this, but whether it's the University of Arizona State University or UCLA or any of our collaborators' universities, we're very interested in working with students that are interested in this growing area of heat policy and governance as well. So I'd encourage students to reach out directly to us.
Kelly.
Yeah. So one of the other projects that I'm most excited about is a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation grant to map shade equity nationally. We've been working with American Forests, who has their tree equity score, and we're adding on a feature that will tell you how much shade is cast at the census block group level in cities across the U.S. And it tells you the minimum, maximum, and whether or not the shade was produced by buildings or by vegetation. Other than that, we've been doing a lot of work with communities and the state to try to do deeper dives into legislation. We're about to start one project examining indoor cooling in homes and schools and looking at sort of the life cycle day for students there. And then, to drive home Lad's point, yes to students, yes to checking heat.gov, and to add on, I think if you follow the Luskin Center for Innovation, UCLA, ASU, and U of A on Twitter and other social media platforms, that's where you're going to get the most up-to-date information about what's happening, because we're constantly trying to push information out there that way.
All right, guys, this is fantastic. I wanted to help you guys get the word out on this grant. I think it's very exciting. And again, your other principal researcher, Dr. Sarah Miro, there are going to be links to her work and her lab there at Arizona State. I want to make sure that's clear. In my show notes, obviously, we'll have a lot of information about the grant. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for what you guys are doing.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Doug. It was great being back on.
Okay, Adapters, that is a wrap. Thanks to Kelly and Lad for joining me on the podcast. Definitely check out the show notes to learn more about the grant and for opportunities to engage the center as they roll out their work in the next few years. It's the beginning of the summer and additional heat planning is desperately needed. The first few years of the podcast, I barely touched extreme heat, but now it's one of the major issues that I cover for good reason. Definitely reach out if you have some innovative heat planning approaches you'd like to share. Okay, I've mentioned in a previous episode, I'm starting a new thing in the podcast, a hot take. For those who aren't familiar, and I looked up a definition, and there are many, a hot take is usually a controversial opinion that has no factually right or wrong answer. It's a knee-jerk response to an issue. Okay, my hot take for this episode. We're going to have a major extreme heat event this summer that will get national news. And yes, I realize that's not that provocative. Bear with me. So President Biden and Trump are planning for a June presidential debate. They are likely to have additional debates. So in the context of this major heat event that I mentioned, my hot take is that the candidates will be asked an extreme heat question and what their responses to the heat event will be. I think it would be the first of its kind for a presidential debate. But candidates are asked about other important weather events. So why not extreme heat, especially if the country has gone through a major heat event? President Biden obviously has heat on his agenda and would be able to answer what he has done. It'll be interesting on how much urgency he brings to an answer and if he ties it in strongly to climate change. For President Trump, will he even answer the question or will he just try to deflect? He's a famous climate denier, so that might come into play. But he might feel obligated to give a response about what he'd do. That's where it could get interesting. I would imagine extreme heat is not an issue he's probably briefed much on. So what would a heat response answer from him be like? His communication style is like a blunt force instrument. And yes, I realize I'm putting that gently. Maybe there's a nugget of useful, simple communication technique that could be gleaned from his answer. I know, not likely, but that's my hot take. Okay, adapters, imagine the potential of showcasing your achievements through a widely acclaimed podcast that boasts a large network of climate and adaptation professionals. Yes, I'm talking about America Adapts and how it offers your company or organization the perfect platform to tell your adaptation story and to spread your message to a diverse and highly influential audience of climate professionals. By sponsoring a whole episode, you not only have the chance to share your story with the world, but also integrate a podcast episode into your organization's long-term communication strategy. It's time to expand beyond the confines of webinars and white papers, which are often dry and forgettable. So let's work together closely to identify the experts who best represent the remarkable work your organization is undertaking in adaptation. This will not only enable effective communication with your members, board members, and funders, but also leave a lasting impact. The value of podcasts lies in their ability to continue promoting your story long after the initial release, ensuring it remains a critical educational resource for years to come. I have episodes that are 6 to 7 years old that still get consistent downloads. And I am humbled to have collaborated with prestigious partners such as Battelle, the Department of Defense, Natural Resources Defense Council, University of Pennsylvania at Wharton, World Wildlife Fund many times, UCLA, Harvard University, the trustees, and so on. Let's add your organization or company to this esteemed list. You can make a significant difference in the world of climate change adaptation. To learn more about the enduring value of podcasts and how they can benefit your company or organization, email me at americaadapts@gmail.com. And before I let you go, I've got a podcast recommendation for you. Living Planet from the German broadcaster DW brings you weekly environmental stories in 3 creative formats to help you better understand the environmental issues of our time. To answer your environmental questions, they have episodes that ask, what's better? Trying to get to the bottom of those simple consumer decisions we make in our lives every day. Questions like, what's better for the environment? Coffee or tea? Paper books or e-readers? Glasses or contact lenses? In their deep dive episodes, Living Planet goes deeper on issues like farmers' mental health and the global illegal bushmeat trade to bring you the facts and debates about important and emerging environmental issues. And when you need just a break from the news in our modern world, check out their Naturally Connected series where they zoom in on one place, plant or animal, and discover how it makes our planet such a truly amazing place. You can find Living Planet on any of your favorite podcast apps. And there's a link in my show notes. Check it out. Okay, adapters, keep up the great work. I'll see you next time.